Sunday.
I thought the hands of time would change me, and I'd be over this by now. Yeah, it's been too long since we got crazy. I'm lucky spinning out. I'm counting down till Friday come. I'm gonna do too much. No, I'm all in my bag, that's clutch. Feeling it, feeling it, feeling it. Every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, endless weekend on a wave, yeah. It's Friday then. It's Saturday, Sunday, what? It's Friday then. It's Saturday, Sunday, weekend. It's Friday then. It's Saturday, Sunday, weekend. It's Friday then. It's Saturday, Sunday, what?
Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. It's not warm when she's away. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone, and she's always gone too long. Anytime she goes away, wonder it's time where she's gone. Wonder if she's gonna stay. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone, and this house just ain't no home. Anytime she goes away. Sunshine, ain't no sunshine when she's gone. Ain't no sunshine, ain't no sunshine when she's gone. Ain't no sunshine, ain't no sunshine when she's gone. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone, and this house just ain't no home. Anytime she goes away.
Captured effortlessly, that's the way it was. Happened so naturally, I did not know it was love. The next thing I felt was you, holding me close. What was I gonna do? I let myself go, and now we're flying through the stars. I hope this night will last forever. Oh, oh, oh. Ain't nobody loves me better. Makes me happy, makes me feel this way. Ain't nobody loves me better than you. I've been waiting for you, it's been so long. I knew just what I would do when I heard your song. You filled my heart with a kiss, you gave me freedom. You knew I could not resist, I needed someone. And now we're flying through the stars. I hope this night will last forever. Oh, oh, oh. Ain't nobody loves me better. Makes me happy, makes me feel this way. Ain't nobody loves me better than you.
Hi, welcome everyone to our second LP and GP Investors Summit on Reimagining Capitalism. Last year, we ran this summit around the importance of investments into climate tech. Before and around the summit, we discussed the importance of and enabled collaboration between investors cross-border. The need for European investors to step up in order to help bridge the funding gap that many Dutch and European scale-ups are facing, and the need for technology and innovation as a source of growth for our economy. This year, we will take a closer look at the healthcare industry and new technologies and businesses that are shaping the future of our healthcare systems and our healthcare access. I believe there has never in our lifetime been a stronger momentum to look at this sector, its impact and growth. At TechLeap, we work with Dutch startups and scale-ups to help accelerate growth and to strengthen the ecosystem as part of the European ecosystem, so that startups can grow and have a global impact. We provide programs and we run initiatives as the summit that we're doing today to gather, share, and solve for bottlenecks for growth together with all of you. We're very much looking forward to engage with you around this topic today and going forward. Maurice, I'm gonna let you share with our audience the agenda for today.
Yes, well, welcome to this energizing virtual event, and maybe it's good that that we don't have replaced the virtual rain in Amsterdam, because the weather is a typical Dutch summer weather. But the program is very energizing with a lot of interesting speakers and insights. We have a keynote from Klaus Hommels from Lakestar. We have a keynote from Dr. Cheryl Holder, bridging the link between sustainability and health tech. We have a great panel with a lot of expertise around specs. And finally, we have a great fireside that has really an interesting artistic twist to it that really makes it different, a real nice experience. So I'm personally also looking forward to that one. But of course, I mean, at the same time, we want to make sure you're part of this interaction and also give us your questions and participate to some of the polling we're doing to make sure that we also take on board your view when shaping the next steps of our projects. For that, actually, you will see on the right bottom side here, you will see a QR code. You can scan that with your second device, your phone, and use it to go to www.menti.com. If that doesn't happen to work, you can also enter the actual website address and enter the code 23815319. And having said that, I think, and having the agenda clear, I think it's time to get started. Yes, so time for our first part of the program. We are welcoming the first keynote speaker of the day, which is Mr. Klaus Hommels. He is founder and chairman of Lakestar, has a long track record in investing in venture, specifically in technology and startup and scale-up, the startup and scale-up space. So yes, great to welcome Klaus Hommels here today. Thank you, Klaus, for being with us. How are you today?
All good, thank you very much. Looking forward to sharing the learnings from the first spec we are currently doing.
Yes, great. And I've understood that you were in, at least this year, the first one in Europe to launch a spec. So yeah, it will be very interesting to learn some of your learnings, maybe things you ran into when starting that journey. So I would say the floor is yours.
Okay, here we go. I'm really pleased to give you some overview how I came up with the idea of a spec and what were the motivations. So historically, I've been active as a VC since nearly 20 years now. Some investments I've historically done range from Skype, King.com, Facebook, Airbnb, Zoom, Coinbase, and several years on the board of Spotify. And that's what then also drove me, that I've seen that the last financing rounds of all this, even European champions, were all done by US VCs. And at some point, I do believe we do need to care a little bit more about our digital sovereignty or technological sovereignty. And that can be either in the internet technology or in the medical or biological environment. So I think we do need to have a new self-esteem if it comes to European sovereignty. And one aspect of that is, also there are two main aspects. The one is we do need to be self-confident in regulating what we want to allow in Europe, and because to protect our culture, which is unique and which is very adorable, no matter if you're in Amsterdam or Saint-Tropez or in Zurich or wherever you are. So, and secondly, it is also that you do need to have the influence on the boards of the scale-ups. So I do not share the view that doesn't matter where the money comes from if your company grows, because with the influence you have in boards, you do have a say in who do I partner with, what are the technological priorities, which path do I go, and that is something where maybe sometimes should also be represented here to keep our wealth in Europe. So I'm very active in terms of having different political initiatives. I have former EU commissioners on my board, former EU presidents, members of member states in the board, in order to provide to companies the support they need on a regulatory level. So, but that didn't solve our problem to basically step up and do the decisive financing rounds of the scale-ups. Decisive financing rounds actually ranging from 50 to 250 million, which currently is not feasible in Europe with European governed money. And that revelation coincided with the situation that two of our companies in the US were suddenly de-specced by US companies. And so I got more familiar with it and saw that there is a very high likelihood if like 50, 60 specs from the US look to Europe and will suddenly de-spec companies which are valued of above $1 billion, then you suddenly have the situation that you have a very structured export of these top 60 companies to the US, because when they list in the US, and that is basically what you do with a spec, you are irrevocably exported. So to say, your center of gravity moves away. So that's why I started then to think about it and approached the CEO of the Deutsche Börse AG and said, look, we do need to have these products in Europe. What can we do to do that? And I said, so we do need to have a cooperation partner. We can help at the stock exchange, but we do need to have somebody who also sets it up in a, let's say, a little bit more trustful way than it is typically done in the US. In the US, you have the situation that the sponsor promote, which is the compensation a spec initiator gets, is basically completely the 20% of the spec paid at the moment of a business combination. So your moment you find a company and you merge with it. And at that time, you can only also sell your entire shares. So this is a risk, an implicit risk in the design of this structure, because imagine this sponsor, the 60 sponsors here from the US approaching European companies, they only have an interest to do the de-speccing. After that, they can sell everything. And even if they sell it at €5 or $5 in this case, they would make millions when everybody loses money. So, and also the company. Imagine you are a prosperous company in Europe, and suddenly you get persuaded with a attractive high valuation that you've never heard of to delist in the US, or not delist, to de-spec in the US. Suddenly you feel tempted. And what happens then is that you think, okay, I have a 1.5 billion market cap. That's great. So I get listed there. And then the sponsor sells everything right away because he can. And then the stock gets under pressure. You suddenly only have 1.3 or 1.2 billion market cap in the US. You're under critically big. The moment you're under critically big, none of the sponsored banks is interested in you anymore. So within half a year, you are from a prosperous European company to dead man walking listed in the US with Sarbanes-Oxley, which you don't need because you're not in the US. So obviously that is not valid for everybody. So the very big ones there is a merit to list in the US. But for most of the companies, the 60 specs would address, this is very much so the case. So that's why in order to really think that through and introduce specs at a broader instrument to have more specs in Europe than then can invest 250, 275 million into European champions and keep them in Europe and make them with this kind of investment also global champions made in Europe. You need to think the entire way through a little bit more specifically. So the design, how we did it was, I don't want to earn money if nobody else earns money. So I postulated in my docs that I do not want to sell below 10 euro. Because at 10 euro, I'm at level par with the investors. I'm in level par with the de-spec companies. So everybody basically starts at zero. So the other thing that in our spec is very interesting, or what you need to do is you need to really show alignment of interest, meaning the compensation is basically at a stock price of 12 or 14 euro, which is a 20 or 40% uplift after the business combination, after the combined listing. I think that is the only way how you can credibly transport that you are a help for this, for the to-be de-spec company. So, and I think there's also one beauty of the concept of a spec, which is that if you do an IPO, you are on your own. And basically, you do your IPO, and afterwards you are alone, so to say. Yeah. But if you do a spec, then and have a partner in the sponsor that has the same alignment and only gets compensated and does have a decent reputation, then you have somebody by your side that helps you with the IPO, helps you with investors, helps you with marketing, helps you with redefining the strategy for the spec, so that you basically have a real support on your side that goes together with you through that phase to then get to the new phase of the company, because that's what it is at the end. It is a capital increase, and a capital increase can be a listing, can be a spec, can be a normal IPO. But this is something where I do feel the spec can deliver some advantages. Other advantages which I see are, for example, that you do get a price security, so to say, and you do get an execution security, because the spec has raised the money, so the market timing of getting the money together is a little bit taken away because it has already been done. The initiator, the sponsor, has taken that risk, and the price you negotiate with the sponsor and the de-spec company is basically the price at which the transaction will happen. So it will not be that you have like a little surprise immediately in 1 week before the IPO, or even 1 day before the IPO, where, as we have seen lately, with the volatility in the markets, the IPO price can still significantly fluctuate. This is a little bit like the universe of pros and cons. So I think we should all make sure we do have this instrument, because it shortcuts the way that we can provide 250 million to superstar companies in Europe. And therefore, it is badly needed. in order to be at level par and to be independent as Europe to finance and provide funds needed for innovation. And secondly, we do also need to think a little bit creatively, because maybe there are different permutations that provide advantages a SPAC can do that the normal IPO cannot. So this is basically a rough overview. And now I'd be open to questions, as it is a very complex construct, which I can understand.
Well, thank you, Klaus, for sharing those insights. It's very helpful, makes it really visible to people. Just a reminder for people, please scan the QR code or go to meitrui.com with the code 23815319 if you want to ask questions to Klaus. But plenty of questions myself also before I address the audience questions. So first one, Klaus, a question on, I mean, it sounds simple, like, okay, I start a SPAC and there needs to be sponsors. I can imagine that finding sponsors and finding investors is easier said than done. And plus, it's quite important from your story what sort of interest they have and what type of investors they are. Can you explain a bit more about how you went about sort of finding the right sponsors and investors, and at the same time, what was your selling pitch to them?
So look, the sponsor is the initiator. So that's basically you, yeah. So it is pretty, yeah. So meaning that is your motivation to do it. So the question is, who are the right investors? Yeah. So basically, you do now. It's easier, yeah. So we were the first. So we had sort of a lot of hassle in terms of what is the right structure? How do you go about the entire regulation? And so this has been now easier because it's public prospectus. You just can copy paste, which takes away already a lot of headaches away. So then there's no way around dealing with banks, normal investment banks that then would basically be responsible for doing the actual IPO of the shell company, the SPAC. And those investment banks do have a list and do the normal placement as it is done with the normal IPO as well. You do have several different characteristics as investors. You have the long-only investors, which are the essential part that you want to have, because you do have a vision, where do you want to go with the company, and you do have to transport that vision, and people need to buy that with a horizon that is more midterm and long-term rather than tactical short-term. And then you do have more like institutional investors from the hedge fund side, which do have this tactical view. And you also need to have them, because you do need people that trade in and out of the stock in order to provide liquidity. And that's why you basically have to define at some point in time what is the right mix between the long-only investors that keep the stocks and the more hedge fund type like guys that provide liquidity and are responsible for the trading capacity of the stock.
That's helpful insights, Klaus. Thanks for sharing. Last question then that I got through is so what does a tech company need to do to look for the right SPAC actually, and which tech companies or health tech companies would be suitable?
So look, I cannot speak for health tech companies, but there are some things which basically there are two things which are important. One, in order to make the dilution and the mechanics work, the target company needs to be at least 4 times bigger than the SPAC, or 3.5 times at minimum, because with the promotes and all the implied costs that an IPO and a merger entails, so this is something from which on it works. Secondly, for the founders that think about the SPAC, I do believe it is it depends on the company that you are, but I think it's a valid instrument. The only thing I would look for is the alignment of interest. If there is somebody who says, "Oh, I'm with you for long term, and you're such a great guy," and by the way, I want to sell everything right away, day one, and even if the share price is below 10, stay away from it.
I think that's some wise words that people can take on board from you, Klaus. Very much appreciated that you're with us here today. I think that ends this first part of the program. Thank you, and we hope to see you soon in another summit or another location elsewhere.
Thank you very much.
So I guess we go over to Eileen.
Yes, thanks, Klaus. Very, very interesting. I feel a little bit bummed I didn't have the time to ask my own questions, but hopefully we can engage again in the future, because it is indeed a very interesting topic when it comes to funding. And we've heard a lot about it in the press, but I think there's more behind it. So we are going to turn now our questions to you, the audience, and we're going to ask a poll question. So I will remind here on the practicalities, which is that you can use your second device, supposedly your phone, use the QR code that you have at the corner, down bottom corner, or type in the code 23815319 if you go onto the webpage www.menti.com. And the question will come up there, and we wanted to ask all of you now, what is your view on exit opportunities for health tech companies?
So while we wait for the results, interesting to see the results. I think we've done a survey before, Eileen, that out there with founders, etc. So it will be good to see also this audience what their input will be.
Yeah, indeed.
So first results coming in.
Exactly.
We wait
And
a
maybe,
bit, yeah.
do we recall, I'm checking now, all of you see the options here, satisfying the exit outside of home country region, more options for exit strategies needed, and exit too early. We have asked the same question actually in the broader ecosystem. And I believe that the result, if I recall properly, was more options for exit strategies needed, right?
Definitely. I think several people see it as an extra option to exit and as an instrument actually, because the overall instruments in Europe are pretty limited still when compared, for example, to the US. So let's see. I think we're getting the results now, and indeed, 42%, the way it looks now and evolves, is more options for exit strategies needed. But the second place for the exit outside of home country region, and I think that's also something we've seen. I think that several parties move to other countries either for reason of funding or for other reasons, like moving to Boston or other regions that they feel are very welcoming. So interesting results.
Definitely, and I think it's also interesting to see that the exit outside the home country, this is also a topic that we touched upon end of last year around our focus on climate tech as well, and when we looked at generally on exits and the European market. Since it's fair to say the European markets are catching up, but we also had in-depth conversations with stakeholders on how the IPO landscape looks, because this is of course key for growth for startups and scale-ups to be able to reach. So it's I think indeed there is room for us and together with all of you to discuss this even further. Discuss with stakeholders also such as government and regulators on how we can improve the exit opportunities for European startups.
Definitely. So let's take that on board.
Definitely. Okay, so I will with this. Now we are going to go over to our panel discussion. We have a mixture of investors and health tech companies, and our panel will be moderated. They will discuss in the panel further the topic of SPACs and SPACs as a potential opportunity for funding as part of financial instruments here in Europe for Dutch health tech companies. And the panel will be moderated by Lisanne Atherley, founder, CEO, and tech investor with over 15 years experience in the venture capital industry. So I will hand it over to Liz and let her make the introduction of our panelists and enjoy the session.
Hi, I'm Lizanne Atherley, founder of Minds to Capital. Welcome to our panel, Reimagine Capitalism, SPACs, and Dutch Health Tech. I'm joined today by an esteemed group of panelists, Eline van Briest, the CEO of Hybridize, René van Vlerken, the head of listing at Euronext, Janke Ditmer, head of direct investment at Gilde Healthcare, and Petra Zijp, managing partner at Nauta Dutiel. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Welcome to you all. So let's jump right in. Over the last year, a global threat touched nearly every person on the planet. Health tech is now more important than ever. The investment landscape in biotech and digital healthcare is rich with opportunity in the Netherlands. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Eline, to set the frame. Can you share a bit about your entrepreneurial journey and motivation for building health tech company Hybridize in the Netherlands? Welcome.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, a little background. I spun out of the university in 2008 with a company called Night Balance, which was a medical device for the treatment of sleep apnea. I subsequently did 3 funding rounds with early stage investors. We did over 80,000 nights in clinical trials to actually prove the device was effective. We got CE approval, FDA approval, commercialized in Europe. And I think the best thing we achieved was to get into the reimbursement coding. The company was then acquired by Philips in 2018. And I then joined my first investors, Tria Capital, as a venture partner, basically to look out for a new company that I could join. I would like to say, since we're talking about exits and IPOs and SPACs, a day before our company was acquired by Philips, another company that was doing an innovation for sleep apnea went public, and they raised 124 million. Wow. This was Inspire Medical. And today they have a market cap of 5 billion. And that's always a company that I look at thinking, should we have chosen a different route than the acquisition to Philips? And actually, Janke Ditmer is here in the call with us. They invested in another company in the medtech space in sleep apnea, which was Nyxoah. And they did an IPO 2 years after us and successfully raised 85.
100 million.
100 million. 100 million. So that was a really nice IPO as well. So I've seen in our industry going companies public, and this is a new thing for us startups here in the Netherlands to see so many companies going public, which is really inspiring.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the specific opportunities and bottlenecks that you've experienced when building a Dutch health tech company?
Yeah, so my last company, Night Balance, actually we got funded by a lot of Dutch investors, and we raised a total of 17 million. But just before the pandemic, I started all over again with a new company, a biotech startup that develops RNA-based therapies for the kidney. That is, again, a really inspiring story. 1 in 10 people suffering from chronic kidney disease, annually 120 billion is spent in this space. And the simple notion that I can really change the lives of these patients really encouraged me to start this startup. But we're now fundraising. In the biotech, we need a lot more money, and we're very early stage. And now, with a lot more experience on board, I'm speaking to a lot of European investors. We need to raise a lot more money than I did with Night Balance. But it's really challenging the early stage that we're at to get that type of money here in Europe. So actually, we're getting much more traction with the US investors at the stage that we're at. So that is a difference in mentality. I see that as a bottleneck for the European health tech startup.
Would you say that there's more funding for pharma rather than digital health tech companies in the Netherlands or in Europe?
I don't know. I would not say that. It's just that I've experienced them to be more open to early stage risky opportunities. Whereas in Europe, I think they are open to early stage, but then with smaller tickets and which allows you to build less rapidly than they do in the US, right? So it's more a difference of mentality. I think the money is there, and I think a lot of early stage investors are here. And with Tuya Capital, we are investing early stage. But the amounts that they have available in the US for these early stage companies are just bigger.
That's an interesting point. And maybe I can ask Janke now at Gilde. What are the focus areas for investment in health and health tech in your portfolios?
So yeah, I mean, for us, we're looking broadly at health tech. So as the head of health tech investment in Europe, I look at medtech, digital health, diagnostics, and life science tools. In all of these areas, Europe is strong in. And I think certainly in the Netherlands, you have pockets of excellence and experience, and a lot is happening. I have to say, in particular, on the medtech side, the big innovations over the last 50 years typically came from Europe and were then made a success by US capital and US corporations, which is something that we're trying to change. On the digital health side, we were one of the early investors in this field. Night Balance is an example, but we also did other early investments starting 10 years ago at a time when Europe wasn't doing very much. And that field has really exploded in the US. We're now really talking digital health being larger in some months than pharma or medtech combined. And in Europe, that's not the case yet. That's what I'm seeing. So while everything is growing, medtech is growing, digital health is growing, pharma investment is growing in Europe, the gap actually is not necessarily narrowing between the US and Europe. And actually digital health, I would say, rather than the normal 4-to-1, 5-to-1 US European gap in funding, we probably have a 10-to-1 ratio. And if you want to do big rounds, you need US investors on board, and they often happily co-invest with us.
Okay, thank you. So that's really interesting in terms of bridging that gap, and maybe I can move it over to Petra now. Perhaps SPACs can help us bridge this gap longer term in Europe. What have been the trends in SPAC listing in the Netherlands compared to other European countries over the last year? Maybe numbers of deals? Ooh, you're muted.
Maybe you can hear me now.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, thank you so much. Why SPACs? I think because SPACs offer investors and targets a very new set of financing opportunities to compete with later stage venture capital. So I think the solutions would be PE, direct listings, or an IPO, and the more traditional IPO. And of course, we now see the SPACs. And I think we have seen, as from, I think October, November of last year, a real SPAC burst coming to mainland Europe. And then, of course, primarily in France a bit and in Germany a bit, but primarily, I think, in Amsterdam. So both Euronext Amsterdam and all the lawyers here and the AFM have been so busy and incredibly busy, and we are still very busy. We've seen many deals. We've seen, we heard Klaus on Lakestar, but we've seen ESG, EFIC, Heda Sophia, Pegasus with an enormous SPAC. And this morning, for example, we listed Climate Transition Capital with ABN AMRO and Morgan Stanley and Barclays as underwriters. And I think it's going on. And I think we will see that until at least mid-July, there will be SPACs coming to the market. I think if you look, we're of course not far away from the numbers in the US, but that's fine, because I think also the market in the US is so much bigger, and I think the numbers there have been a bit crowded as well. But if you look here in Europe, I think there's even after Brexit a real focus on the continent of Europe. You may have read the Lord Hill report, where he said that they should really change the listing rules, because the UK is losing it a bit, because they will have a trading hold once a business combination is announced. And I think the FCA is working on that now. I think we'll see many more SPACs later this year.
Thank you, Petra. And maybe I can ask Renee now. Given the local bottlenecks and funding and the frenzy in SPAC listings that Petra talked about, how can we reimagine capitalism using European SPACs to support the growth of health tech companies over here?
Well, first of all, of course, a SPAC is not the holy grail. There are certain consequences of being listed as a fast-growing company via a SPAC. Every company that is considering to sit down with the sponsor to discuss a potential M&A transaction by being acquired by a SPAC has to realize that it becomes a public traded company. So there are certain responsibilities that that company has in being a listed company. So that is one. But what can a SPAC do? Actually, it is, as Petra also said, it's a great alternative for a traditional IPO or being acquired or at least being invested by private equity. It is a relatively efficient and short route to market. Because it is an M&A transaction, there are some positives to that in a way that you are discussing your valuation of a company with one investor instead of having many investor meetings with investors who are more generalists than specialists. And because there are so many SPACs in Europe and in the US looking for doing acquisitions, it's more or less a seller's market at this moment of time. So your negotiation power as a company is much better than in certain cases in a traditional IPO. It is a great alternative. We, as Euronext, we believe that the SPAC market in Europe can definitely develop into a sustainable SPAC market in the next coming years. But there are some things that still needs to be done also to facilitate that European market. Yeah,
that brings me to my next question. Why is Amsterdam the top hotspot for SPACs compared to other European countries? And what can they learn from the Dutch to make it more of a single European market?
First of all, it's about the quality of our market platform. I think that the international track record that Euronext, but not so much Euronext itself, but as we always say, the Dutch ecosystem. It's the advisors, it's the regulators, it's the banks, it's the law firms, basically all parties which facilitate that capital market in the Netherlands. And we work extremely well together. We really build an ecosystem with the same ambitions, with the same motivation and the same way of doing things. And of course, we are an economy which is very much skewed in doing international trading. So that means that we are a very open economy, and that also relates to the openness of our capital market. Now that attracts a lot of international companies. If you look at the number of international companies which have been listed on Euronext Amsterdam recently, you see that we do much better than other platforms in the rest of Europe. And why is that? Because of all those, as I always say, external elements which make it for international companies very attractive to come to Euronext. And of course, that also attracts the sponsors because they are looking for a platform which will facilitate the target company in the best suitable manner.
Speaking of which, some criticize SPACs for approaching target companies that are not yet ready to become public. What are some important considerations for SPAC investors and target companies to understand before considering using a SPAC?
Like I said, I think that the target company needs to realize that it needs to prepare in becoming a publicly traded company. So you need to make sure that, let's say, your governance is in place, your accounting, your financials, your investor relations, your communications. But also you need to think about elements like talent management, like culture, the soft elements, which sometimes companies tend to forget. Again, it's a shorter route to market, so that means that you have less time to prepare. And one of the risks is that let's say the investors who have participated in the SPAC is actually not a group of investors that you believe are long-term committed to your company. So that means that from the first day onwards, you will have to invest heavily in investor relations, in connecting with the global investor base to make sure that you're going to end up with a group of investors who really support your company for the long term.
And one of the points that our keynote speaker, Klaus Hummels, made is that de-SPACing is kind of one of the key components of this whole process. I mean, we can ask you, Petra, how is Amsterdam leading the way in de-SPACing in the EU? And can you walk us briefly through the de-SPACing process and why it's so important? Very briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. I think we are yet to see the first big de-SPAC transactions, but very shortly, I think the five steps in a de-SPAC process are the following. It's what we call in the jargon a business combination. So first, the target must be identified. So the SPAC management, as Renee mentioned, as of day one, begins with talking to privately held companies to identify a target. It will, as a second step, raise additional funds because, as Klaus mentioned as well, you will need to have more money in order to buy that one. So you raise additional funds, or that could be in a round of funding, as Alina mentioned, or in another way, but or as a PIPE, so a private investment in public entity. The third one is to prepare a shareholder circular and negotiate your terms, sign an agreement. Then you have your EGM, and then of course you complete the merger and start the life of the target company in a listed jacket. And that is kind of that is the 5 short steps, very short, of a de-SPAC transaction, or a business combination as we call it. And we have seen, of course, in the 90s and also during 2006 and 2007, 3 de-SPAC transactions in the Netherlands. And we know now that some of the SPACs that have been listed earlier this year are working on the first steps of these 5 steps.
Thank you. So there are opportunities, but there are also some long-term challenges in Europe compared to the US relating to SPACs. Particularly with respect to IPOs, Europe represented about 57% of the 14 unicorn IPOs over the last 2 years, but SPACs may hamper this balance because if over 100 billion has been raised globally in 2021 in SPACs, and only 2.2 billion of this in Europe. Not to mention US SPACs targeting and acquiring European tech leaders. Now, I will hand this over to Janke, perhaps, because you had some quite strong opinions on our call. What are some long-term challenges to European versus US SPACs?
I think in general, we need to indeed put things into context. And I just got the latest numbers today from Belfius and Kempen. And if you look at all the SPACs, not just healthcare, the US had 630 with 140 billion in SPACs year to date, and Europe was 4.9 billion, of which the 26 SPACs, of which 1.5, so around about 1/3, was in Amsterdam, which makes Amsterdam the leader in terms of volume, not in numbers. So we are basically at 1% or something like that. Of the US volume, and that's in principle not a bad thing, because a SPAC used to be an instrument that had gone out of fashion because of many misalignments in terms of interest, and we've earlier heard about some of the problems, but this is something that we find challenging as a VC investor, that basically a SPAC doesn't necessarily have to create value for shareholders of the target in order to be successful. I think the 2-year period is also somewhat artificial, and it creates a push at the end of the period to basically just buy a business. Because even if you have 20% of something, even if it's not the greatest thing on earth, it could basically redeem the cost that you've made in establishing the SPAC, but it could be a very bad deal for the target company. Ultimately, if you want to go public as a route of financing your company and maintaining independence in the long run, what really counts is the liquidity of the stock, the ability to be covered by analysts of key banks, and having that momentum out there in order to raise more funds, and for some of your investors to eventually go out and better and new ones coming in. And when you go through the SPAC structure, especially given that many of these SPACs are quite large, you really need the pipe on top of that to look for liquidity, and the majority of these SPACs are followed by or concurrent with a pipe. And that means that you're probably having to absorb quite a lot more capital than you originally planned for. So many of these SPACs are in the 200 to 300 million range, and then you do a pipe, you want to probably be 100 million. So suddenly what looks like very attractive in terms of high valuations, looks like less dilution and a faster, somewhat maybe a month or two faster processes, ends up being probably equally or more dilutive. And you don't necessarily have the same amount of liquidity as you would otherwise. And there's lots of legal problems as well in terms of how you merge with the SPAC when the SPAC is a US entity and you're a European entity. without losing the Nasdaq listing. And so there's all sorts of complexities around that. And you immediately have to kind of comply with all the reporting requirements that otherwise, if you are an F1 on Nasdaq, you would get a little bit more time to live up to. So those are just some of the examples.
Okay, thank you. And so perhaps we can close it out and you can take us away, Renee. What are some of the solutions then that would provide future opportunities for international investors in Dutch SPAC listings? No pressure.
No, I think a few short answers to that. I think that the European SPAC market would benefit from more harmonization across countries and the way that regulators look at SPACs as an instrument. That is one, because we see quite some differences in countries, how the regulator and how, let's say, the market is appreciating the instrument of a SPAC. So more harmonization and more alignment across markets, that would certainly help. And the second part is indeed that I certainly hope, and fortunately we see some signals of recent SPACs coming by, that the long-only investors, so the more traditional long-only type of funds, that they will also participate in SPACs, not only in the pipe, but also in the SPAC itself as a sort of a see-through investor. And fortunately, we have seen some SPACs where indeed also the more long-only qualitative type of investors are participating in that, which is great because then it shows that SPACs can also suit the purpose of more traditional investors.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Renee. We have a question, but I think I will ask it. It's for Ellen. As both an entrepreneur and early stage investor, who could help you or who could you help contribute or drive change in investment risk mentality?
Who could contribute to help change that mentality?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's only the investors that we have here, because it's also the fund sizes that of the funds that we are able to raise here in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
It's also the investors that invest in us, right? So the larger the funds, the bigger the risks that you can take in that sense. So it's a total ecosystem that needs change. So how do you make that change? That's a really good question.
That's what we're trying to do at TechLeap. And with that, we're out of time. Thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists. Let's get more capital into the Dutch health tech ecosystem. Thank you very much. I'll hand it back over to Eileen and Maurice.
Yes, thank you, Lisanne. That was a great panel, nice insights and good practical things also around what to do as an investor, as a founder, to get ready and to make sure you're ready and select the right SPAC. With this, actually, we are going to next part, which is some polling again. Again, as said before, you can go to the website and use the QR code if you haven't done so already. And we're ready for the next question, which is around what are the biggest bottlenecks that companies face when growing in the health tech. On that note, I think this case there were several a bit more different answers, because we've seen also from our experience and feedback before from founders, etc. There were different reasons. Some really are running into problems commercializing the technology and the IP. Others really run into regulatory problems, whereas some actually focus on or need more focus on getting the right talent in the management team. And finally, and that's the one actually that starts to spike, attracting the right type of investors that really understand what you're trying to achieve and understands the longer-term growth model of your company. So let's see with the first results coming in, Eileen, let's see what the audience says.
Yeah. As of now, it seems to be pretty even between commercialized technology, obviously a challenge in heavy sort of tech businesses as health tech entails, and attracting funding. And the third one, I see finding the right talent. Yep. So it's moving a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to say that this echoes a bit what we've seen recently in surveys where actually we saw a different perception, or it seems to we're still studying that in more detail. But it seems that investors may have a bit of a difficult vision or view than founders themselves, where founders really more look for and have struggled with finding the right investors. Investors actually say we need more high quality founding teams. So
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting challenge and probably defines how we should make sure this is unlocked and can be brought to the next level. So I think that's a good insight and is being echoed here, I think, while the results still coming in.
Yeah. It may be worth mentioning that we will share these results as well after the session with all of you, together with the other insights that we're at the moment putting together through our data report. I think, for us, it's slightly different since we're here in the room, but I know for all of you audience there in front of the screen, I think it's a little bit overdue for a break. I think we have read enough now about the Zoom brains and so forth, so I think we're all going to take a break, but I want to highlight what's coming up next, so please make sure that you come back since we will have then our second keynote speaker, who is joining us from the US, and it's Dr. Cheryl Holder. And she is a co-chair of the Floridian Clinicians for Climate Action. So we're going to make the link between the topic that we focused on last year on climate and how it affects also the health industry. And she's working particularly with vulnerable communities and seeing how climate change is changing fundamentally and how the change within this population sector can work as a wake-up call or a cue for how the healthcare industry going forward will fundamentally change in relation to how the climate change in relation to climate change taking place. So with that, I will leave you all enjoy the short break.
Our future depends on the answers we find to the challenges we face. What tomorrow will look like is determined by the decisions we make today, by the connections we create and the partnerships we develop. Technology is the key to the future. Capital fuels technologies and the teams behind them to have a long-lasting impact on future generations. But who should we empower with our money for a stronger, sustainable and inclusive future? On which issues, climate, health, security, should we focus? TechLeap wants to ensure capital is deployed in the Dutch tech ecosystem where it is most needed, where it can contribute to a more sustainable global future while also benefiting the local economy. We share insights, provide relevant connections, and make the ecosystem reach its maximum potential by unlocking structural capital. Together with entrepreneurs, investors, and other stakeholders, we will strengthen the infrastructure to make the Dutch tech sector one of the most progressive, relevant, and impactful in the world. Together, we can unify capital and innovation for a better and more sustainable future. Our future depends on the answers we find to the challenges we face. What tomorrow will look like is determined by the decisions we make today, by the connections we create and the partnerships we develop. Technology is the key to the future. Capital fuels technologies and the teams behind them to have a long-lasting impact on future generations. But who should we empower with our money for a stronger, sustainable and inclusive future? On which issues, climate, health, security, should we focus? TechLeap wants to ensure capital is deployed in the Dutch tech ecosystem where it is most needed, where it can contribute to a more sustainable global future while also benefiting the local economy. We share insights, provide relevant connections, and make the ecosystem reach its maximum potential by unlocking structural capital. Together with entrepreneurs, investors, and other stakeholders, we will strengthen the infrastructure to make the Dutch tech sector one of the most progressive, relevant, and impactful in the world. Together, we can unify capital and innovation for a better and more sustainable future.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back after this short, well-needed little break. And with this, I will now directly introduce you to our next keynote speaker, who is Dr. Cheryl Holder, joining us from the US. In Florida, to be more precise, she is co-chair of Florida Clinicians for Climate Action, and a key leader who has dedicated her career to serve underserved population and whose health is fundamentally changing due to climate health. Cheryl, welcome. We are thrilled to have you here and very much looking forward to have you share with us your thoughts and your insights. How are you?
Doing great, thank you.
Good. Good. So I will hand it over to you directly. Would much rather hear your voice than my own. So please take it away.
I'm really honored and excited to be here with experts whose goals aligns with mine. For me, becoming a doctor was my path to make a difference in this world by helping people live long and healthful lives. And for TechLeap, you embody bringing CEOs, investors, policymakers, and ecosystem builders to create solutions to today's biggest challenges. To solve the world's biggest challenges require that we change how we think about the world. And what better time to reassess how we think about the world than now, as some countries emerge from a pandemic. Last year, 2020, what a year. We learned that the truest threat to our species is not simply the existence of a deadly virus, but rather the gross societal inequities that expose worldwide and whose harms were exacerbated by mixed messaging, disrespect of science, and the inability of our leaders to work together. Unfortunately, as I have worked my entire career caring for people with low wealth, I have to admit, I wasn't surprised. So many lives were lost. In many respects, this outcome was inevitable. However, the truth is, it didn't have to be this way. And I'm not going to spend time dissecting the pandemic and pointing out all the wrongs. Rather, I want to share some stories of people in my community, people who have lived some of the toughest lives with dignity. I want to share their stories with you because in them, I see the path forward to determining our priorities to solve our biggest challenges, save our communities, and save ourselves. We are in the midst of a truly existential threat. And if we don't act now, within the next few generations, life as we know it will be unrecognizable. I don't want that moment to come, and I don't want our children and grandchildren one day say, it didn't have to be this way. Of course, I'm talking about climate change. And just like the coronavirus, HIV, AIDS, and many other societal ills, it's killing poor people, especially Black and Brown people right now, and at rates higher than everyone else's. The question is, as always, why? Context matters. We know that all human lives are affected by the conditions under which we're born, grow, live, and age. The school we attend as kids, the parks we play in, the places we worship, and the jobs we get are all shaped by the systems and policies that govern our access to resources, money, and power. As you can see on the slide, genes and clinical care account for only 20% of our ill health. 80% is determined by our behavior and societal conditions. And yes, as expected, this results in what you have heard. The wealthier you are, the healthier you are. My patients live that truth. Let me tell you about Miss Anime. This isn't her, but this picture reminds me so much of the Black woman I cared for in my career. She opened my eyes to this epidemic so many in our world denied. She's a retired worker living on a fixed income in an old house in a poor section of Florida. She had all the common chronic diseases, hypertension, diabetes, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and she walked in for medication refills. She was one of my more adherent patients, so I was surprised she needed refills of her breathing medicines earlier than usual. Then toward the end of the visit, she hands me a form from her electric company and asks me to sign it. She was behind in her light bill. But this form allows physicians to document serious medical conditions that required equipment that if the electricity were disconnected, would impact the patient. But Ms. Anime, I said, you don't use any medical devices for breathing. I don't think you qualify. Further questioning revealed she had been using her air conditioner day and night because of the heat, so she could breathe. Needing to buy more inhalers left her little money. She couldn't pay all her bills, and it all piled up. Then there was Jorge. This is Jorge, and he allowed me to tell his story as part of his legacy. He was such a sweet, kind man. He often gifted my clinic with some of the fruits he sold on the streets of Miami. He had signs of worsening kidney function whenever he worked days on end in the hot streets due to dehydration, just not enough blood getting into his kidneys. His kidneys worked so much better when he took a few days off, but with no other income, what could he do? He always said, rain or shine, cold or heat, I have to work. One of my most unfortunate cases was that of Maria. She is undocumented and a new mom who was infected with Zika during her pregnancy while living in Miami. Fears of the possible damaging effects of the infection on her baby left her depressed, and her immigration status left her few options for care. As my awakening continued, I then learned that the allergy season started weeks earlier. Nighttime temperatures are higher. Trees are growing faster. Mosquitoes carrying diseases like Zika and dengue are showing up in areas where they didn't exist before. Yes, including Europe. And people were moving all over the world as their lands dried up. An undeniable clear warming trend was underway, creating a bigger health emergency than the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and will be even more than the coronavirus pandemic. As that slide shows you, 2016, which is when I met Ms. Annie Mae, was one of the hottest years, tied with 2020 in our recordings. Climate change caused by the excess of CO2 and other greenhouse gases generated by transportation, industry, agriculture, electricity generation and housing was affecting the health of my poor patients. Climate change impacts us in 4 major ways. 1, directly, heat, pollution, extreme weather. 2, spread of diseases. 3, disruption of our food and water supply. 4, disruption of our well-being. In medicine, we like mnemonics to aid our memory. And this one, heat wave, shows the 8 major health impacts. H, heat illnesses. E, exacerbation of heart and lung conditions. A, asthma worsening. T, traumatic injuries seen during extreme weather events. Water and foodborne diseases. A, allergies worsening. V, vector-borne diseases like Zika, West Nile, and dengue. And E, emotional stress increasing. Poor, vulnerable people, especially Black and brown people, are already feeling the effects of climate change. These disparities are real and are created, driven, and maintained by systems and policies. In the US, Black and brown people live in communities that are close to factories and highways and polluting industries. They're exposed to particulate matter rates 35% higher than white communities. Nearly 50% of the Latin population live in counties that violate ground level ozone standards. The disproportionate impact of these living conditions have led to long-standing environmental injustices and poor health outcomes. A prime example is Louisiana's Cancer Alley along the Mississippi River. Slide. The high rates of cancer for the people in this area has been known for decades. Unsurprisingly, Tessum and others showed that there was inequity in consumption of goods, that ethnic and racial minorities felt the brunt of the pollution while the rich enjoyed the products made. In a world in which we and our systems assign differing values to lives, lead us to ignore the inequities placed us on the path of NIMBYism, not in my backyard, and saying yes to needless things when we should have said no, not at all. But together, we can find solutions. During the HIV epidemic, activists push politicians, foundations, NGOs, industry, and international health agencies to collaborate to discover medications and commit to find ways to ensure low-income countries access treatment. Technology is essential to solving the climate crisis. But like in HIV, this sector must collaborate and commit to paying close attention to the needs of those that are feeling the greatest impact of climate change now. They are our prophets, our guides to remind us we have done something to this world that affected them first, and we are next. It's just a matter of time. Solving their challenges gives us solutions that will help all of us. We need you to continue to develop technology that will help my patients adapt and thrive while allowing us to reduce carbon emissions now. This will move us faster and closer to stopping the rising temperatures. Please continue to do good work. And as the late, great United States Congressman from Georgia, Mr. John Lewis says, get into good trouble. For only then will we force the world to rethink what must be done. While you innovate, advocate for policies that support our humanity, such as high quality education, especially for girls and women. Fight against biases internally and externally, like racism, casteism, classism, sexism, homophobia, and any form of isms that devalues people. Demand unpolluted and safe living conditions that support our physical and psychological health. The truth is, we already have everything technologically to impact lives. But we need imaginative solutions that solve this most challenging problem, not just for those who live lives like ours. It doesn't have to be the way. We have been doing it. We need to rethink how we think about the world and find beautiful solutions that center people that you may never meet, like my anime, Maria and Jorge. Their lives depend on it. If we can do this, we can save lives, change the world, and save the world. Thank you.
Back to me. Oh, thank you so much, Cheryl. This is, I feel like applauding you. It's inspiring and of course touching and also a little bit sad to hear the stories that you shared with us. And I'll see if there are any questions from the audience, but in the meantime, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, you touched upon this, the importance of technology and innovation. And of course, we work in the midst of startups, scale-ups, trying to help them grow so that their solutions can reach a broader population, customer base, or so forth, and including also, of course, the poor and the vulnerable. So in your view, what role in all of this, because of course we need to work together, policies and so forth, but in your view, what role does the innovation and the technology play in all of this? How important is that? And in your career, have you seen any examples on this and how it has changed people's life?
Technology is key. We are not going to be able to scale up and make rapid changes unless we find a way that people can identify and understand some of the changes that's happening. I look at energy efficiency. When you think about energy efficiency, with my patient Anime, 20% of our household in the US, a lot of their income goes to paying this electric bill. If we in somehow could even just get the simple things like LED bulbs and change over the use, having folks understand just not wasting electricity, we could reduce the cost in that population at least 20-25%. If you look at the UK, heating, if we found a way and we centered the needs of the people who can't get the double paying classes, increasing insulation in the homes and saving and stop the waste of the heat, we also have tremendous improvements we could in what we waste in our energy. And that would get immediate response in how we address the climate. So there's some low hanging fruits, but it really has to be, how do we distribute it to poor people? They did a study in the US where the poor communities didn't even have access to buying these LED bulbs. So some of the simple technologies, some of the simple information systems that we could get, how do we make sure that if we get any improvements, how do we then track it down to the lowest income so they too can benefit from these improvements? The other areas I look at small farms, 60% of our world production of food are done by women in farms less than 5 acres. Yet much of the technology that we have not found a way to get that to these women. If we could just improve these women's production, we would decrease deforestation, probably even more so than what we're seeing in this $1 billion that Biden is trying to get with the countries that are doing palm oil. So if we look at how we can strengthen what women farmers do, how we can strengthen women education, that the long-term effect is even more tremendous than the billions of dollars we put out at the top in decreasing production of palm oil. So what we're looking at, the innovations, doesn't have to be fantastic things. There's simple things that we now have that we can absolutely use to make that difference.
Yeah, great. Indeed, distribution, very important. And I think, yeah, a topic I'm a little bit taken, to be honest, because I think, of course, it makes so much sense. You know, we're in the middle of this. We see all these technologies, think it's great. But of course, then also, as you say, the distribution, getting it out there is also a big part. And I think you also have a lot of innovation and technologies in these areas. So very good point and great insights that I hope that we can continue to discuss and build together with the ecosystem here in the Netherlands and in the Europe, and also, you know, build on you know, connect the bridge also to the ecosystem in the US. Unfortunately, Cheryl, we are out of time. I would love to continue discuss with you maybe later at the networking session, and I hope we can stay in touch. And thank you so much for sharing your insights. Well, I wish you a good rest of the day, and thank you so much again.
Yes, and on that note, I think indeed it makes you sometimes a bit silent when hearing these stories and realize, you know, we're busy with sometimes very abstract things and investing and business cases, but there is, of course, a whole world out there that is changing and impacting people every day. Now, maybe difficult to bridge to the next topic, but we are going to do it. So the next topic is a sort of fireside, but how to spice it up, how to surprise people in this digital era. I mean, I can't wait to have real physical discussions with actual people. I think we just discussed, we both have that same feeling. But what we're very happy with is that we're combining now two different things. One is we have an art reveal of Constant Dullaert. Constant is a recognized artist internationally. He is very much into the digital space, and where artists often present reflections and go very abstract, Constant actually dove into the digital space and thought how to influence the way, especially during Corona, that people experience together events or stories, and so he will reveal that. At the same time, and adjacent and using what he's launching, we are actually going to what we call the Unicorner, where there's 3 people together discussing the scaling challenges, the scaling journey into health tech. And that will be with Mark-Jan Harte, the CEO of Edens, and Koenraad Wijnhap from Leiden Labs, 2 fast-growing companies in this space, in different ranges of growth, but still quite important. And they will be accompanied by Constantijn van Oranje, this the Tech Leap envoy that always makes sure we keep our true north in the right direction and do good in everything we do. So now over to Constant and the fireside. Thank you.
Hi, hello. My name is Constant Dullaert, an artist who's been working with the digital realm for a while now. I've run an army of 13,000 Facebook profiles I created as a performance to warn for the dangers of the system in 2015, before the elections that Donald Trump won. I've had a staff-picked, fully funded Kickstarter hardware startup. I've found the very first photograph ever photoshopped, which was then later exhibited next to Van Gogh's sunflowers. I've been called the Lenin of social media. Anyway, enough about me. Today I would like to welcome you to this online garden I developed. A project I built during the lockdown to offer a very exciting yet private local grassroots alternative to online social meetings. An alternative that offers a more natural approximation of social experiences by stimulating by chance meetings. Common Garden is an online platform in which anyone can have a meeting, exhibition, or any type of social event by creating their own custom garden. In this garden, I will show you around some of my artworks that I'm actually showing in a room I created for the TechLeap fireside chat. After the first of thousands of online video meetings, I actually realized I missed this casual by chance encounter, running into friends and looking at nice things like art. Instead, I was seeing people staring at each other at a screen, at my own face most of the time, and everybody was on mute, so you couldn't hear each other laugh. And apparently, it's also impossible for humans to not look at their own reflection if they see it. So we built this, an online environment where you can see artworks or other content or read these articles and see other people moving around. I'm using this video function now to explain, but in the standard function, you basically only see the name of the person or talk to them when you're actually close to them, and you actually don't get to see the video. You just have an audio connection, like a kind of instant casual phone call. While you're actually looking at these artworks. So you could actually, for example, meet at an artwork by chance, or for example, in this case, meet at the fire. And the art openings during the lockdowns that we did were through kind of magical events. It was really a kind of beautiful experience because you didn't see who was in the room from the beginning. Every meeting was kind of new and original, but also informal. So we kind of knew we were onto something. In this work, you can choose your own route or animate the route that Mark Zuckerberg actually travels between his home and the Facebook headquarters, combining companies Google and Facebook, who have, I guess, more insight into my life than my own therapist. And these routes are basically seen through the eyes of a nostalgic way back when the world was actually different, radically different than how we see it now. The next work that I've shown here, and you can come and see, is...
There had been something more to sell.
At least we thought so. But who?
It's this video, The Unjust Mirror. So while I had access to thousands of fake accounts from earlier works, I decided to spread poetry all over the web during the lockdown. So feel free to come and visit this exhibition afterwards and mingle around and try out how it feels. The poem can actually also be read here if you click and drag in this screen.
Had there been nothing more in a renunciation than this?
And anyway, please enjoy the show later on, or mingle with people afterwards, after the day. And anyone can make a space here or log on with them without an account. We think social media can be different. We think the social can be for everyone, can be common. There can be a common garden for everyone. Thank you for your time. My name is Constant Dullard, and feel free to visit this exhibition later on techleap.com and .garden.
I don't know if we are live now, but I get a cue that we're live. So this is very exciting. This is the Unicorner with two aspiring unicorns, or future unicorns, in the room by the fireplace. My name is Constijn van Oranje. I lead TechLeap, which is the accelerator for the Netherlands startup ecosystem. And we will be talking about the health tech market, investment opportunities there, and we're talking with two very talented founder CEOs. We have Conrad and Mark Jan. Conrad of Leiden Labs, and Mark-Jan of Aidens. And we'll be exploring with you the your entrepreneurial journeys, but also how it is to develop your businesses in health tech in the Netherlands, your choices of investors, and maybe comparing a bit between the EU and the US as markets, but also as investors. But briefly before going into our chat, I'll run you through a bit through the Dutch healthcare market as we see it at TechLeap. I would like to start by saying that a lot of focus is on the health system. So a lot of activities around better delivery of care. That's where a lot of activity goes, which is slightly different than the market. So it's how do you apply innovations within the system, and maybe less how do you develop businesses in the healthcare system. And we segment the health tech market in biotech, pharma, the health platforms, and the devices, so medtech markets. And they all behave in slightly different ways. The devices and platforms have a lot of startups, but we see difficulties for them to scale, especially to get the bigger rounds of funding. Whereas in biotech and pharma, the funding funnel seems to be more developed, and the ecosystem around it as well. On the other hand, the health tech market is one of the biggest markets in terms of venture capital in the Netherlands, and also in terms of numbers of startups. It means that there's a lot of activity, and we as TechLeap are going to provide some specific attention to this segment, because we believe there's not only incredible impact to be made here, but it's also worldwide an incredibly growing venture sector. And there's a lot of enthusiasm and potential in the Netherlands in terms of patents, but also in startup development, which we think deserves to go to scale ups and grow further. So here we have two incredible companies, and I'd like to start with Conrad of Leiden Labs, who just recently closed a round of 40 million.
Yes.
Ahead of the game a bit. But so Conrad, can you take us through your entrepreneurial story and all the things that happened this last year?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And great to be here, Constantijn. So I'm Conrad. I have a scientific background, and then worked with large pharmaceutical companies and biotech companies as a partner at McKinsey, both in Europe and in the US. We, at Leiden Labs came together with the founding team, so Jaap Goudsmit, Dinko Valerio, and Ronald Bruss, actually in the garden of Dinko, and thinking about this was in the first lockdown of the pandemic. How can we make sure that this never happens again? How can we make sure a pandemic like this will not hit us again like it did, last year, and of course up until now. And with that mission, we really started the company, Leiden Labs, where we could build on, what are the founders, but also the people we immediately involved as ambassadors and as board members in the US have done before. And what we're doing is developing nasal sprays that can actually protect against the whole broad range of viruses, so that when a new virus comes, whether it's a fully new virus or an escape mutant or a seasonal variant, that we can have a product in the form of this nasal spray to protect us, so that we can all live our life to the fullest and have not to be, bogged down by, of course, the threat of a new virus.
But typically, biotech pharma companies take a long time, a long development time. You have just been established, and you already raised 40 million. So you have an atypical go-to-market strategy and also investment strategy. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yes, we believe we want to be as fast as possible to be ahead of a new virus, to be ahead of when something comes out. So that's also our mindset. So what we did is we started as a virtual company right away, so that we can actually work with an external network of different, both academic and commercial partners here in the Netherlands, but also more broadly in Europe and actually in the US. So that and of course, based on the network of the people that I founded the company with, we could do that very quickly, so that we didn't start from scratch. What we did in the funding strategy, Constantijn, was that we started with a seed round where we actually had ambassadors, that we call ambassadors in the company. So there were more than just investors, but people from here in Europe, but also in the US, that helped us with the initial funding, which is important, but much more important, helped us with making sure that we can move as fast as we can in R&D. And also with the basically the first larger financing round, indeed, as you say, the Series A, where we are extremely happy with our investors that are, I think about this also in a way, how we think about it, thinking big and making sure that we can quickly make progress. And that's why I was also, for European standards, the larger funding round, the larger Series A, I would say, where we can then immediately build the company, but most importantly, progress in these products as fast as we can towards the clinic and beyond.
Yeah. That actually brings me to Mark-Jan. You have a more traditional part of development. You run an AI company based on or focused on diagnostics. Can you elaborate a bit on your entrepreneurial journey as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Constantijn. We started Aidence 2015, so we're about a little more than 5 years old. The intention, our goal when we started, was to make an impact in healthcare by applying AI to it. And we saw that there was a lot of research coming out at that time. This was all new, and we thought, okay, this all research is fantastic, but how do you actually make something useful? How can you make a product out of this that you can sell and also does something useful? And for us, we decided that was going to be improving the lives of people with lung cancer by applying AI. And so that's what we did. We have created a product over the past couple of years that helps radiologists in the early detection of lung cancer, which is extremely important because it improves the chances of survival tenfold. If you get the cancer detected in stage 3 or 4, your 5-year survival is only 6%. And if it's detected in stage 1, that shoots up to 60%. So that's really significant. And now, at this moment, there are actually drugs coming to the market that you can actually treat you in that early stage. So not only can we detect it and diagnose it, but you can actually do something about it to actually cure you. So this is something that is our mission as Aidence. And we are working, say, from the patient pathway. So we started with a product in radiology for the detection, and we're now working on extending that to making sure that those patients are treated and managed in the correct way from, say, detection up until hopefully being in remission and being released from the hospital.
So your product here is very B2B, and you've. But how can you take us a bit through how easy it was to actually get investors on board, and what you see in the Netherlands currently or in Europe as the biggest drivers, but also maybe some of the barriers that you're experiencing rolling out your company and growing it?
Well, of course, one of the biggest challenges you have in health tech is that our software is a medical device. So that implies the regulatory aspects doing clinical trials, and you're selling into hospitals and our hospital systems, and those things take time. So it took us 4 years before we could sign our first commercial contract. And of course, that entire time had to be funded. So it was indeed a bit of a challenge, of course, to get a seed round that we got from Dutch investors and to convince them that this was a great idea and that but you still have zero traction at that time. But also in terms of at the time of our A round, it was 2 years ago, which was led by Incaf. Also at that time, we still had zero revenue. So, and if you're a software company that has zero revenue but requires a substantial investment, that is so typically something that is quite difficult for investors to wrap their heads around. So it's really important to find the right investors who understand the mission that we're on and why you need to accept that there is a time needed to get to the point where we can actually showing traction. So there's a lot of very strong. You need to be willing to invest based on the team and the mission and the execution that you're showing, and not necessarily only based on, say, the spreadsheet calculation that you would typically have in a SaaS type business.
Yeah, did you have a lot of troubles explaining that, or do you find that there is an investor base that understands this?
Well, there are some, but not all of them. So as usually, as always, of course. So I think we are fortunate that there were a couple in the Netherlands that did understand this and that were happy to participate in our rounds, like Health Innovations, for example, for our seed round, but also Henk and Inkev, as I mentioned.
You're jittering a bit. Maybe check the Wi-Fi because it was kind of jittery. Maybe can you repeat the last? I think was it for you as well that you, or was it just on my end that I didn't get?
I could understand it quite well. Yes.
Okay, so then it might be on my side. Sorry to interrupt you. But just moving on to you, Conrad. You went for American investors. Was that because they had a different set of expertise? Was it because you wanted to go to the U.S. market? Why did you actively seek out investors outside of Europe?
Well, yeah, exactly. The more important, the initial investors, seed investors, were both from Europe and from the US, and that's also how we see it, right? To have actually combined, and by the way, could also be from other regions than Europe and the Americas. So we didn't specifically look out for American investors. We did look for investors who had that same mindset as what I said, where we actually think that we need to move fast in order to be successful in this, to be remain in the lead. So I think that was very important. We did seek out indeed for sure a combination between Europe and the US to immediately also reach out to the US investors. I think on this, and I would never say that pandemic was good, but what made it easier now that everything went through Zoom, right? So it was actually it's much easier to instead of for 3 sequential meetings to go to San Francisco up and down. That having 3 Zoom meetings after each other, of course, makes it also easier to do that. But the most important that we wanted that the combination and then the specific investors with that mindset, not so much whether they from the US or from Europe.
Okay, maybe can you elaborate a bit on where you see the richness of the Dutch and European health tech market? Where do you see there's a lot of potential, maybe underutilized potential, or under-recognized potential, and where you see growth happening in the next few years?
Yes, no, I think we have amazing science in Europe in general, but also specifically in the Netherlands, or if you can say the Benelux as a region, which very, very good universities, very strong academia. We have also amazing investors, of course, in the life sciences. Some of the largest funds in Europe. So I think also there we're very strong, and we have actually a broad talent base. If you just think about the sort of Benelux region, with actually the legacy companies such as Crucell, Organon, but now Janssen, of course, Crucell, but also Janssen in Belgium. So actually we have also that talent. And actually, if you look at it, I wrote a report in about a year ago about it, and you see actually that if you take Benelux as the whole region, and after the UK, it's actually the region where there were the most startups between, I think, 2012 and 2018 was the data set were in life science. So I think we built from a fantastic base, and there's still a lot of science, I think, uncovered. So there's still a lot of potential also in academia, but also in smaller biotech companies and health tech companies that could still be further unlocked if it's done with that mindset. What you indeed, Constance, you see a bit more in the US, where you can actually unlock that and make sure that you grow that very quickly with the right combination of scientific expertise, development expertise, but also business expertise, and taking that together to move that as fast as possible.
Yeah, and Marc-Jan, do you see anything holding us back, or would you see that maybe holding you back to follow that same kind of rapid growth path?
Well, I think where the largest opportunity is for the Netherlands and Europe in general is the ability to federalize the data that's being used. Of course, we're an AI-based company, so having good data that is representative of the patient population is crucial. to be able to create products that actually really work well and generalize well across different populations. And what I think is at the moment is there's still a lot of untapped potential of that data being locked in silos and storage in individual hospitals. That could be used to really unleash an enormous amount of research and also products and startups. But that is still something that is quite hard at the moment to make clear under which conditions it is allowed and when it is not allowed to use that data for research and for to commercialize it. And I think if we have clear guidelines on a European level to do this, then I think we could really do a lot that we haven't seen anything yet.
So I understand that Finland and also the UK and France that have done substantial work around this, especially Finland, about providing, especially for medical data, also a legal framework. Are you aware of that? And would that be a reason for maybe just moving to Finland or another market?
Well, and yes, I am aware of that. For example, also in Sweden, there are different regulations about it. Often, though, you have to be careful as that what is and isn't allowed. For example, for research, right? Typically, you can switch the rules around and say actually it can be used unless you opt out. But then commercializing that is often a different game, and then you get into a lot of licensing rules, and universities want a piece, and then suddenly it gets really complicated. But for us, indeed, in the Netherlands, it's definitely something that we are looking at very carefully. Also, in fact, we are working with data from the US, and we just are in discussion with data from Scotland to use for additional product development. And we have some of this in the Netherlands, but actually it's quite small. So I would love to be able to do more with the Dutch data as well.
Yeah, and we also see from our research that it's actually one of the few startup segments where regulation is high up in the concern regions. Usually it's capital, and then it's talent, and then and those kind of always are fighting for the first or second place. But in this category of companies, regulatory pressure or burdens are mentioned as problematic. Konrad, do you experience that too? And is there any message that you would like to give around this topic?
Well, yeah, I know on regulation, of course, it's that's always a challenge, and that's of course also good, right? To make sure that that everything is done in a very safe way before anything comes to market and has been tested all through. So I think the most important thing, I believe, is really working together, and that we have seen in the pandemic, of course, with the vaccines. That if regulators and industry and actually governments work together, and what we can achieve within a year developing multiple vaccines and producing them against COVID-19 is of course amazing that we can do that. So I think hopefully that mindset of working together to actually keep the products, make sure that they're safe when they're coming, right? But also to see where can we unlock it to make it done faster. I think that's a very important way to work together, and of course with here in the Netherlands, with EMA in the Netherlands, thinking about that together, of course, keeping that very separate, because there's separate functions of the health system. But I think that's a very important mindset to my mind.
Well, a last question, which may be a more personal one for both of you. You chose this sector. It's you're both doing stuff that is saving lives and or protecting lives. What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? And because you chose to start a company and not to become a doctor or something. So what legacy do you want to leave behind? Maybe Mark-Jan, you start first.
Yeah, our goal, as I said, is to give people with lung cancer a fighting chance. So if you translate that into what would make me incredibly proud in 10 years from now, if we could say that we help to improve, so we double the 5-year survival time of percentage of people that have cancer. If we can do that with our AI technology, that will be amazing.
Great.
Yeah, for me, so I have a scientific background, and then by working on my first job in the business development, I really found that I want to work on that intersection, because actually to bring medical innovations, to patients that need them, to make that bridge, which is the personal goal I have. And then through Leiden Labs, what we're trying to do is actually keeping healthy people healthy, which I think is also very important, to make sure that we never get to this again, that we have to, stop our lives because of a virus. And of course, much worse things of people getting ill, people dying, loved ones dying. And to prevent that from happening again, and to protect the world against new viruses, but also viruses that are there, that's really the mission we set out for ourselves.
Well, thank you very much. I know this is a sector which requires quite some endurance, but thanks that you are enduring and that you are role models to many other companies that want to make it in this space. And we'll try to be there to support you to make this happen and to address some of the issues that we come up in our research as kind of holding us back. But I also see a lot of issues actually driving us forward, and I think that's those we need to focus on. Seeing the positive and the massive opportunities in this space. So I wish you well in next funding rounds or in achieving your objectives. And I hope to see many of your products actually reaching the market and saving lives. So thanks for joining us, and well, back to the program.
Thank you, Constantijn.
Thank you, Constantijn, Konrad, and Mark-Jan for sharing with us some of your insights. Inspiring indeed to hear your stories and what I think we can expect on the positive end of all of these things. So we have our last poll question for the evening before we go to our drinks. So I will quick reminder, QR code or put in the 23815319 on the www.menti.com. And the last question that we have for the evening or for the program is, what is the main challenge for you to invest in Dutch health tech companies?
Yes, so let's see.
Would be an interesting one.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, maybe worth also mentioning that what we do in our team, we do work. We spend an important part of what we do to also engage with non-Dutch investors. There are a lot of Dutch investors here, but we're also working on the cross-border aspect of this. So it would be interesting to see from your point of view what you find as the main challenge, and hopefully we can help address those as well in our initiatives.
Yeah, we've seen some bottlenecks already being mentioned in the discussions today, like the specs really being an asset when adding new funding structures. At the same time, I think some mentioned already the quality of the founding team. Let's see here what the current investors engaged are saying. It seems like a clear point of lack of high quality of viable business models. It's an interesting one. I think resonates a bit with research and results we've been seeing and feedback we've had from discussions with investors before. So yeah, interesting one. And then the lack of quality of exit strategy. Indeed, we do see some companies that say, well, we have a bigger dream, for example. We want to stay autonomous. We do want to get capital. Into the and quite a large pool of capital into our organization, and they feel it's quite difficult to actually plan longer ahead and maximize the outcome of all the potential cures or medical tools that they are creating. So I think that's important to see. But with the long stretch, I think the lack of high quality and viable business models seems to come out from the audience today. So that's a clear feedback for us going forward.
To take into account and find a way to deliver and work on.
Yeah, so and talking about feedback, I mean, we're reaching sort of the end of the central part, but as TechLeap, we are also a startup ourselves and need to make sure we keep improving our summit. So on the same polling system, you can actually enter a rating for the event. If you have appreciated the panel, also the speech of Klaus Hommels and the keynote speech of Dr. Cheryl Holder, and maybe the very funny actually fireside, literal fireside, where I saw sort of Constantijn above the fire, and I'm wondering whether he was actually getting the heat from the fire. So I think that was quite a funny thing to see. I hope you have appreciated this format, and brings me to a point to the next step, which is that we first of all now already want to thank everyone organizing the panelists, the people contributing through the keynotes. I think it's quite great to share. But also I think that we've seen more than 40 very influential people joining, and investors with themselves an important story to tell. So maybe next time we can ask you to come on stage and explain your experience or your bottlenecks, so that we can keep sharing amongst each other. And also we are actually running a task force internationally to look at addressing funding bottlenecks with different stakeholders, as also Dr. Cheryl Holder was saying. So on that note, I think there is a nice, after this, maybe even nicer for some, there is the Constant Dullard, the artist, has his virtual gallery. So that is open, you can visit that. You can do two options really on your screen. So I must say I am dying to have a quick look there, see how engaging it is and how we can move around. At the same time, there is, of course, also a moment to connect through the AirMeet and meet other people that were involved, or some of the speakers, and exchange views or ask questions and share insights, which is in the end, I think, enriching for all of us the experience for today. So on that note, I would like to invite you to take the next step with us, and we'll be getting back to you with the next summit, but also working groups and initiatives to actually address the current bottlenecks. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Your new messiah, 'cause your theories catch fire. I can't find no silver linings. I don't mean to judge. When you read your speech, it's tiring. Enough is enough. I'm covering my ears like a kid. When your words mean nothing, I go la la la. I'm turning up the volume when you speak. My heart can't stop it. I'll find a way to block it. I go la 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 la. I go la 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 la.
all these things that we took for granted. We've lost dancing.